Practically every one of our dead was found with his rifle torn down next to him, where he had been trying to fix it. That line came home in a letter from Hill 881 South, Quezon, 1967. A Marine wrote it to his family. He had watched 143 of his 250 men not come back. The New York Times ran it on May 20th. Time ran it on June 9th. Congress read it into the record. The rifle the dead men were fixing was not the enemy's. It was theirs. This is not a video about the AK-47. Every channel on the internet has made that video. AK reliable, M16 jammed, AK-1. Made 1,000 times. What no one has done is explain the specific sound that came out of a Vietnamese tree line and never stopped playing in American heads, and the specific reason that sound scared them more than the bullet behind it. This is that story. You hear it before you see it. A flat crack, lower than your rifle's snap. Slower between rounds. You know the difference between friendly fire and enemy fire by the time you've been in country 3 weeks. Because in triple canopy jungle you cannot see the man shooting at you, and your life depends on knowing which direction to return fire. Your M16 makes a higher pitched report. His rifle makes a sound, 1 register lower, 1 pitch darker, and when his burst hits open ground near your feet you can hear that too. A different thump from the turf. Green tracers. Your tracers are red. You know this before your first firefight because someone tells you. In the dark, red is yours. Green is his. The first time you see green coming back at you from the tree line at night, something happens in your brain before your body reacts. The color green in that context is not processed as information. It is processed as a threat state, instantly, below the level of thought. You are already moving before you have decided to move. The NVA rifleman who opens a firefight does not need to hit you to win the first 30 seconds. He needs you to stop moving forward. A single well-sighted soldier with an AK-47 could hold an entire American company pinned behind cover. Not because his aim was perfect though, it could be. Because his rifle kept cycling while your boots found the dirt. An AK-47's operating system was built around loose tolerances. The bolt group rattled inside the receiver. The clearance between moving parts was wide enough to keep cycling through carbon fouling, sand, water, and mud that would have locked up a tighter machined rifle in seconds. Kalashnikov designed it that way deliberately. He had watched men die in the snow with frozen, malfunctioning weapons at the Battle of Bryansk in 1941, and he had built the opposite of what killed them. The result was a rifle that functioned in every environment, at every temperature, with almost any ammunition, in the hands of soldiers who had been using it for 2 days. And in the central highlands of South Vietnam, in triple canopy jungle, in monsoon rain and river crossings and rice paddy mud, it functioned the same way. The acoustic fact of that flat crack from a position you could not locate, combined with green light moving toward you at head height, was a weapon independent of the bullet. It was a weapon against the nervous system. And the US Army gave the NVA an enormous advantage in deploying it. That advantage was a chemistry decision made in a Pentagon office in 1964. The rifle that jammed. The M16 was designed around a specific propellant. IMR stick powder, extruded, clean burning, pressure matched to the rifle's gas system at the factory. That combination worked. The early users at Ia Drang in November 1965, the Green Berets, the first ARVN units, they reported the XM1 6E1 as reliable. The rifle was functional when it left the drawing board. Then the Army changed the ammunition. The manufacturer couldn't produce IMR powder fast enough for mass deployment, so the Army's Technical Coordinating Committee approved a switch to Olin Mathieson WC-846 ball powder, a cheaper and more available option, without retesting the rifles that would fire it. In December 1965, the Frankfort Arsenal ran the tests that should have been run before the switch. Stick powder M160S had 3.2 malfunctions per 1,000 rounds. Ball powder M16S had 18.5. The failure rate had jumped nearly 6 times. The field was not told. Ball powder burned differently. It left a chalky, sticky residue inside the gas system. It pushed the cyclic rate above design spec, and the unlined steel chambers, the chrome plating the Army had rejected as unnecessary to save money, corroded in Vietnam's humidity, pitting the walls so fired brass swelled and welded in place on every other shot. To clear a failure to extract, you had to stop firing. Retrieve a cleaning rod from your kit, thread the sections together, run it down the muzzle, drive out the stuck case from the breech end, in full view of whoever was shooting at you. The Army had not issued cleaning rods. The training manual stated the M16 was self-cleaning. The phrase came from Colt's promotional material, adopted as doctrine without testing in field conditions. By November 1965, Colt's own internal testing showed approximately half their rifles would fail with ball powder. That report went to the Army. The Army allowed Colt to test acceptance batches using its remaining stockpile of stick powder, the ammunition that had worked, while shipping the rifles to men who would fire them with ball ammo. 330,000 rifles went out under that arrangement. When the Hill fights started in April 1967, the 3rd Marine Division was 6 months into operations with the new rifle. The men at Hill 881 South were not reporting a theoretical problem. They were reporting what they had watched happen to the men beside them. The Marine who wrote that letter had 107 fewer men than he'd started with. He knew what had killed most of them. Someone read it. Congress read it. In October 1967, the House Armed Services Special Subcommittee completed its investigation. Ichord, the Missouri congressman who had chaired it, summarized what the Army had done to its own men in one sentence: read into the Congressional record. The failure on the part of officials with authority in the Army to cause action to be taken to correct the deficiencies of the 5.56mm ammunition borders on criminal negligence. No one was charged. No one went to prison. The AK-47 kept firing. The shame. Joe McDavid was an artillery liaison officer with the Marines on Hill 881 South, April 1967. He watched what happened when the rifles failed in the middle of a battle and wrote it down. We found dead Marines with broken down M16s as they tried to fix the jammed weapons. Many Marines were found with AK-47s taken from dead enemy and used them until killed. Roldan was 20 years old. His M16 jammed. What happened next was photographed by Catherine Leroy, a French photojournalist embedded with the Marines. The photograph ran in life. It showed a corpsman over him. Roldan's rifle was beside him. It had not fired. One wounded Marine working his way to the rear after a contact was seen using 2 jammed M16s as crutches. He could not walk on his damaged leg. He could not fire the rifles. He needed them to stand. Elite units had already reached the rational conclusion. SOG recon teams operating in Laos, Cambodia, and North Vietnam carried captured AK-47s and Chinese Type 56 rifles on sterile missions that left no American markings, nothing that could be traced back to the United States if the team was killed. The operational reasons were 2. Reliability in terrain and water that fouled M16S in a single patrol, and acoustic camouflage. Firing an NVA rifle in NVA territory generated the enemy's signature, buying confusion in the seconds between contact and response. In the specific mathematics of a SOG team, 5 to 8 men, miles inside denied territory, with no quick extraction available, a rifle that fired every time was not a preference. It was a survival calculation. John Stryker Meyer of Este, Idaho wrote that no man on his team carried an M16 as a primary weapon. The men fighting the conventional war made the same calculation with fewer options. Then the Army confronted the problem that proved how far the collapse had gone. They banned carrying the enemy's rifle, not to protect the enemy from confusion, to protect Americans from their own side. The AK's flat crack in a firefight drew immediate fire from every American soldier who heard it, a trained reflex. GIs who carried captured AKs were fired on by the men next to them. In some units, the practice was formally prohibited because the distinctive sound of 7.62 x 39mm attracted friendly fire. American soldiers who trusted the enemy's rifle more than their own were getting shot by Americans who heard them trust it. The acoustic weapon that started the story had become a liability for the men who carried it. A hospital in the Kazakh SSR, late autumn 1941. A Soviet tank commander named Mikhail Kalashnikov was recovering from a German anti-tank round that had hit his T-34 at the Battle of Bryansk. He was 22 years old, his shoulder destroyed listening to men in the beds around him complain about their weapons. He began sketching in a notebook. 7 years later, the Red Army adopted the result. It was named for him. He lived long enough to understand what he had made. In 2012, 18 months before he died, Kalashnikov wrote a letter to the head of the Russian Orthodox Church. It was published in Izvestia. He signed it, "A Slave of God, the designer Mikhail Kalashnikov." It said, "My spiritual pain is unbearable. I keep having the same unsolved question. If my rifle claimed people's lives, then can it be that I, a Christian and an Orthodox believer, was to blame for their deaths?" He had no way to know. He had sketched the rifle in a hospital bed. He had been trying to save soldiers, not kill them. He designed a weapon that kept firing in the mud and the rain and the blood, because he had watched men die holding weapons that didn't. He did not know that 25 years later, those qualities, the reliability, the loose tolerances, the long-stroke piston that kept cycling through anything, would be deployed against an army whose own rifles had been made to fail by the institution assigned to supply them. He only knew what he had made. 50 years after Hill 881 South, a man parks his car in a lot in Ohio. A truck on the street backfires. The sound, that specific frequency, that flat percussive crack reaches him before his brain has time to identify it as a truck. Something trips in the auditory cortex, older than language, that files that sound under a category that has not been relevant since 1967. His hands go somewhere. His body does something it learned in a jungle half a century ago, in a firefight where the green tracers came back low and the man next to him was trying to fix his rifle. The VA's audiology research found in 2007 that 34% of the first 300 patients enrolled in its tinnitus clinic also carried a diagnosis of PTSD. The tinnitus was often the sound of sustained gunfire. The PTSD was often the combat it accompanied. They arrived together and they left together, or they didn't leave at all. The flat crack of a 7.6 2 x 39mm round is a specific acoustic event. For men who were in Vietnam between 1965 and 1973, it is not only a sound, it is a nervous system state they returned to without choosing to. The rifle came home with them, in their heads, and it never stopped firing. If you served in Vietnam, or if your father or brother did, leave his unit and his year in the comments. The men who carried that fight deserve to be named, by name.